Ah, come on now, Bobby. It's time to get over it. She's back with you, and she'll never cheat again. You've been together for 15 years and have two great kids. You don't want to destroy all that. If you divorce her, she'll have your boys and both of you will live in poverty. Getting back together is the best for your whole family. I don't know what was uglier, the fat slob bitch saying, just get over it, or the message she was sending about forgiving her sister for fucking around. This wasn't just an instance of getting drunk on girls' night out and screwing an old boyfriend. This was nuclear in nature and punishment needed to dealt out. My trouble was that if I was the one pushing the red button, the nuclear fallout would hurt me much more than anybody else. No one else had as much to lose as me. And this fat bitch lecturing me did not help my mood or ability to make the perfect plan. That's where I was, me being Bobby Smith, sitting on a pontoon boat in a lake with the three of them, that bitch, her loudmouth asshole husband, and my cheating wife. Being a native of Kansas, I was never going to swim the 300 yards to shore. That's an Olympian challenge for a flatlander. In 10 minutes, I was going to shut them up and give my slut wife an unforgettable reminder of her cheating. Zero, ooh, zero, ooh, zero, ooh. Now a little background on me, the poor bastard that was the center of this shit storm. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, self-proclaimed air capital of the world. Boeing, Cessna, Spirit, Beechcraft, and Embraer all have manufacturing plants in this industrial city. My performance in school was average. Not that my parents cared. Mom was an alcoholic, chain-smoking, rough-talking slut. Dad actually thought he had married up when they got together. My older brother and sister, presumably with the same father as me, could not handle the fights, abuse, and 911 calls from concerned neighbors. They left the same day they graduated from high school. They wished me luck and never looked back, afraid they would end up as witnesses in a murder trial. My teachers told me I was smart enough to get good grades, but I felt I had little sunshine in my future. At least I waited until the morning after graduation to leave the house. My first and only stop was the U.S. Army Recruiting Center. Since I had done well in my shop classes, I signed a contract to be a wheeled vehicle mechanic. That was one of the first times in my life something positive seemed to be in my future. To others, an Army private's pay is peanuts. To me, I felt like a king. My platoon sergeant liked me because I did not make trouble, did my job well, and got along with the other guys. We drank, partied, and fucked around for 2 years. At the end of my Army tour, I decided I wanted to go back to Wichita and work in one of the aircraft plants. I enrolled at the National Center for Aviation Training for the special training and education I needed, get one of the better jobs. My major was aerospace manufacturing and technology, just where I thought I would thrive. Cessna was my first choice for a job and was happy when they hired me. 6 months later, I was helping a buddy build a shop onto his garage and had an accident that changed my life. I wasn't happy about it at the time and bitched out my buddy for letting his side of the metal roofing go. That mistake caused a big cut to my chest that bled like a stuck hog. At first sight of the blood, I called medic, then laughed because I was no longer in the Army. My buddy shoved a shop rag onto my cut to stop the bleeding, and we headed for medical assistance. There was a dock in the box just a mile away, so he drove his pickup in there. I was not bleeding to death, but I was making a mess on the floor, so they put me into a treatment room right away. Not for my safety, but for the optics of a guy dripping blood all over the lobby. What happened next changed my life forever. The most beautiful nurse ever to walk the earth came into my room. She was tall, well-built, with shoulder-length dark hair, and her smile lit up the room. Her name tag said, Nurse Ann. Looking at my jeans, work boots, and bloody t-shirt, she turned her gorgeous blue eyes to me and said with a smile, I didn't know they were having tryouts for the TV version of Jackass today. I don't know about that, as I was busy single-handedly building a children's home while curing cancer. My wound is a result of a sheet of metal blowing off the roof caused by the cheers of the Mensa Society members celebrating my discoveries. She halfway smiled, smirked, and laughed at my comment. It's only 10:30. How much beer have you had so far this morning? None so far, but that depends on how long it takes for you to fix me up. After all, you can't drink all day unless you start in the morning, was my comeback to her. While looking at my chart, she asked, I take it you are a cigarette smoker also? Yep. You're showing a strong resemblance to my brother, she muttered. Do you love your brother, the smoker? She took a deep sigh and said, "Yes, but there are days." I asked, "So there is hope for me to be able to take you out, since I'm so like your beloved brother?" That was met with, "Ha, please take off your shirt. I have more important work to do than spend time with a jerk like you." It was difficult to pull the shirt over my bloody shoulder. She cut the shirt off, but not before shaking the scissor out in front of me as a threatening gesture. Not saying anything, she started wiping the blood and some dirt off my chest. I am 6 foot tall and 190 pounds of mostly muscle. I think that is what caused her to spend more time on my cleanup than I expected. She chuckled when I reacted to the painful disinfecting alcohol that was liberally splashed on my wound. I would have thought she would have caringly told me, "This will sting a little." She moved to the door, turned to me, pointed to the exam table I was sitting on, and sternly said, "Stay." For only a second I could see her smile. A few minutes later, Nurse Ann and a doctor came back into the room. I read in her face the anxiousness that I would continue to be obnoxious and embarrass her. If I was to get anywhere with her, I needed to be a better patient. It was "yes, sir," "no, sir," "yes, doctor," when answering questions. I was being pleasant and compliant to whatever they said. While the doctor was taking a closer look at my wound, she was standing right behind him. I winked my eye. She smiled. The doctor had Anne prepare a syringe to dull the pain, while he gathered the needles to stitch me up. While he was fixing me up, I was staring at her watching the doctor. Occasionally, she would look up at me, smile, and look back to my chest. After Anne applied a dressing, the doctor told me, "No strenuous activity, keep the wound clean, and make an appointment in a week to have Anne take out the stitches." Great, I was looking forward to having a date with her. He laughed. She got red in the face, but I was happy. Grinning, he said to me, "We need to have this room cleaned up in 3 minutes. Can I count on you two to conclude whatever you need to do within that time frame?" "Yes, sir," I said. Anne didn't say anything. She just smiled. "What time can I pick you up for dinner tonight?" I said with a smile. She thought for so long I thought it was going nowhere. Then she said 7 p.m. She had a funny look on her face as she questioned, "Red pickup?" "Yep." "Figures," as she walked out the room. I went home to get me and my pickup cleaned up for the evening. My attire was clean jeans, fresh cotton shirt, and nice leather shoes. Anne would have been shocked and disappointed if I would have worn anything better than that. Her attire was identical to mine, only she looked much better in her tight pair of jeans. More men looked at the fit of her cotton shirt than mine. She knew the footwork needed for a 5'7" woman to get into a 3-4 ton pickup gracefully. After an initial period of awkward silence, the conversations were continuous all evening. We both told our life stories up until now. She was from a little town in southwest Kansas that I had never heard of. Her parents and her brother had a farming and ranching operation there. I had rarely traveled west of the city limits, so I could only guess what was out there. It was dark by the time we left the Mexican restaurant. I asked if she had seen the Keeper of the Plains statue on the rivers. She had no idea of what I was talking about, so I drove her to the confluence to the Big and Little Arkansas rivers. Where these two rivers meet in the center of Wichita, artist Black Bear Boson created a 44-foot-tall statue of his artwork, Keeper of the Plains. Indian lore speaks to this spot being a gathering place for various tribes to powwow. Trail drivers on the Chisholm Trail kept longhorns in this area prior to the live cattle being loaded and shipped to Chicago for slaughter in the 1870s and 80s. I knew this from my visits to Wichita's Cowtown, which was a recreation of Wichita in the 1870s. At night, it was an imposing sight with its spectacular lighting and a bridge over the rivers that symbolizes a bow and arrow. She had been in Wichita for a couple of years, but never been here. We stood on the riverbank and enjoyed the view and all the families that had come there for the nightly event. I kept an eye on my watch, and when it was 9:44 p.m., I moved to stand beside her and put my arm around her, a move she accepted with a grin and a wiggle. At 9:45 p.m., 7 fire pots in the river exploded with a huge roar and 30-foot gas-fueled flames shooting into the air. It made Anne jump into my arms. She shook with surprise and fear. That was until she felt I was holding her tight to my good shoulder. She looked up at me and said, "You knew that was coming, didn't you?" "Yep." "You don't have to scare me to hug you. Just ask and I'll gladly put my arms around you," she said with a grin. With that, we shared our first kiss. Not a kiss of passion, sparks, and fire, a kiss of caring and wanting to become close enough to do this again. When the firepot display ended, we walked back to my pickup, arm in arm. I walked her to her apartment door, made sure no one else was in the apartment, then turned to leave. "Don't you want to stay for a little while?" she shyly asked. "I want to stay here for as many years as you let me, but I think it is best for me to go home after our first date and start reviewing my calendar. I need to schedule all the times we can be together for the next month." Anne stepped toward me and threw her arms around me, holding herself as close to me as she could, and said, "This was a special night for me. Be here tomorrow at 6:30 for dinner." That next evening, I arrived at 6:30 p.m. carrying red roses for my new girlfriend. She opened the door to show off a beautiful yellow sundress. She had a funny look on her face as she said, "Those flowers are nice, but I was just leaving to go on a date with someone else. I don't want to be late. Would you please put them in some water? Oh yeah, lock the door as you leave. Goodbye." Then she whisked out the front door. I could see the flowers wilt in my hand. What had gone on here? I found a vase, put water and flowers in it, and went to the door. As I opened the door, there stood Anne, laughing at the look on my face. "You tricked me with the fire pots on the river last night. I got you tonight. Are we even now?" "I guess we are until the next time," I said with embarrassment. She grabbed my arm and said, "Come on in. I hope you like what I've made for dinner tonight." She gave me a choice of wine or beer before we started dinner. I chose beer. We laughed about last night and how much we enjoyed each other's company. We touched each other every chance we got. Not a grab, but gentle touch of care and endearment. We both knew where we would end up later that evening. It was that room adjacent to the living room. There was already a soft lamp glowing on the night table. I doubt it was because the cat was afraid of the dark. She was so nervous that she kept apologizing if I did not like the food. I finally grabbed her hands and said, "Stop. I love the food and how you prepared it. Never apologize until I tell you I don't like it. But remember, if your hands touched it, I will love it, okay?" That made her feel so much more confident and happy to have me there. We had a wonderful dinner, with lots of laughing and discussing the things in life that were important to us. After dinner, Anne commented, "Why don't you have a seat on the couch while I clean up my kitchen?" As requested, I went to the couch for about 10 minutes. Then I got up and walked behind Anne and put my hands on her hips. She did not jump or move away, so I guess that was okay with her. I moved my face close to her to smell her hair and said, "You really smell nice." She turned her face to me and said, "Thanks." From there, I started nibbling on her neck, and I saw the goosebumps. No noise from her, but neither was there a shrinking away from me. She just kept washing plates and would occasionally shrug her shoulders. While neck nibbling, I stroked her bare arms with no complaints. My arms were on both sides of her and were resting on the countertop, putting all of my body in contact with her. She had a hard time turning around to face me without dragging her luscious tits across my arms. When fully turned, she said, "You're not going to let me finish the dishes, are you?" "Nope." Whispering, she said, "So what activity is going to replace doing dishes?" Let me search for an idea. I put my hands just below her armpits and slid them along her sides all the way to her knees. Gently, I rubbed and stroked the back of her knees and calves, then started to raise up my hands. My thumbs caught the hem of her dress as I lifted my hands. Even though I wanted to see what I was revealing, I could not stop looking into those blue eyes. When I reached her armpits, I could see she was not wearing a bra. She raised her arms straight up, giving me the opportunity to pull the dress completely off of her. I carefully took the dress and laid it on a kitchen chair. "My God, I had no idea your body was so beautiful. I was just impressed with your face and personality. This body is just perfect. You are the whole package, Anne." I stepped forward, put my arms around her, and kissed her with all the emotions I could put into my lips. She responded in kind. As we broke the kiss, she took my hand and took me to her bedroom to take off my clothes. She laid on the bed and called me to join her by waving her finger. I laid beside her and said, "You had the opportunity of admiring my chest with your eyes and hands. Can I have the same privilege with your chest?" I could tell she was proud of her girls and welcomed the attention. There was not a square inch of her chest that I did not worship with my hands and mouth. Her nipples were hard as pebbles, and the look on her face showed that she was ready to move onward with our lovemaking. Without asking, she raised her hips so I could remove her panties. I held them to my nose, and the fragrance was delightful. The moisture and heat coming from this piece of lace was remarkable. She grabbed my sturdy dick, pulled it toward her crotch, and said, "Please make love to me." How could I refuse? It was a good thing her pussy was creating so much moisture, as it was tight enough to require some gentle rocking back and forth before I was fully into her. Her moans told me that my equipment was making the correct contact with hers. We established a rhythm that was glorious to both of us. She was experiencing small, rapid orgasms every few minutes, and I was keeping up a pace that kept me from erupting with a volcano of semen into her. The pulling on my stitches helped me to focus on a slow and easy rhythm. The timeless event continued until the signs of a gigantic orgasm for her appeared on her face and neck. Her neck muscles were contracting and flexing, her eyes were losing focus, and the moaning sounds were increasing in intensity and volume from her gapping mouth. Frankly, I could not have held out much longer either. I was so into this woman, I had to explode. The moment had come as our duet of coming sounds filled the bedroom. We were both out of breath and covered in sweat. As we leveled our breathing, I started to roll off and she said, "No, please stay in me and on me." I took my weight off of her by being on my elbows but still on her. Her eyes could now focus, and we enjoyed just looking at each other. Dreamily, she said, "Bobby, you're not my first, but you were definitely my best. More importantly, I want to be your last." Smiling wickedly, she said, "I like the way you think. So, when will be my next last one? Later tonight or tomorrow morning?" I thumped my chest and said both. For the next 3 months, we were together every evening and all weekends. It was time for me to meet her parents, and I felt a little embarrassed as I really had no family in my life. I almost felt like I came from an orphanage, so it may be an interesting weekend with her family that went back several generations on the same ranch. The plan was to leave right after work on Friday afternoon and come back to Wichita Sunday night. After starting my pickup, I asked Ann for the directions to her family's ranch. She said, "Drive west from Wichita for 2.5 hours to get to Wyatt Earp Boulevard in Dodge City. Drive west on Wyatt Earp until you get to El Capitan. That's the bronze longhorn steer in the middle of the street. At El Capitan, turn south, left for City Boys. If you go by Boot Hill, then you've gone too far. Once you are headed south, keep going until you cross the Santa Fe Trail. From there, turn west off the paved road and wake me up." You're fucking with me again. What kind of directions are these? Where is the address I can plug my GPS into? Why aren't you staying awake to guide me? She said, "Bobby, those are the directions and the landmarks of getting to the ranch. You'll do just fine. You wore me out last night, thinking we won't be able to have sex in my parents' house tonight. My pussy and I need a rest. Wake me up when we are south of Dodge City." With that, she pulled up a pillow and laid her head down. Of course, there was a smile on her face. There were very few stoplights during the next 2.5 hours. I used each one to stretch and move around to keep my legs from going to sleep. 2.5 hours later, I could see city lights of Dodge City. I drove by 2 huge cattle slaughter plants and several large concrete grain elevators until I saw a street sign that said, "Wyatt Earp Boulevard." Damn, her directions were correct so far. Several blocks later, there was a statue in the middle of the street of a longhorn steer. This is crazy. Now I have to find the Santa Fe Trail sign. She appeared to still be asleep, but I did not believe it. She is too much of a perfectionist to let me wander in the prairie trying to find a century-old cattle trail. I gently gave her butt a rub and she answered, "Not again, dear. Could you wait an hour, please?" "Come on now, wake up before I end up in Oklahoma." "Okay, Bobby, where are we?" she said like she really was asleep, but I doubt it. "Oh good, there's the Miller place, just 3 miles to go." She started combing her hair and fixing her makeup. We turned off this gravel road at the sign that said Clear Creek Ranch, EST 1872. A ranch-style house came into view as well as several buildings, pens, and barns. A couple in their 50s came walking out of the house to greet us. Anne became giddy as she saw her folks in the yard. The pickup had barely stopped moving before she jumped down and ran to her mother for a hug. By the time I had walked up, she had also hugged her father, and gave him a kiss on the cheek. Mother, father, this is Bobby Smith. Bobby, this is Pat and Bill Green. I took off my ball cap and shook Bill's hand, and Pat gave me a nice hug. We went into the house to have a late dinner. Ann went with Pat to finish up in the kitchen. That left me with the unenviable task of talking to the father of the woman I have been fucking every chance I could for the last several months. Of the women I have been with, I was never around them long enough to get to know their parents. It was a new experience for me. Bill said, "It's a long trip to Wichita. Would you like a drink of something? Tea, water, beer, whiskey, or bourbon?" "Cold water followed by a cold beer would suit me great, sir." "No need to call me Sir Bobby. I'm Bill to everyone here." As Bill returned, he said, "Ann's brother Gary is not here tonight. There was a cattleman's meeting in Dodge that he had to attend. You'll meet him tomorrow. Gary's not married and lives in a mobile home on one of the other ranches." Since I had nothing to offer in the way of family, I started asking questions about the pictures and items in the family room. Bill was a walking, talking history book about Clear Creek Ranch. It was homesteaded by Pat's Carter family. They were cattlemen and had one of the first cattle brands registered in this county. Their brand was 2 C's back-to-back and put on the unlucky cow's right hip. Both the Cater and Green families had long history in the area. There were pictures of old cowboys and cowgirls all over the place, and all were related to Pat or Bill. Both Bill and Pat came from large families, so Ann had lots of cousins, nephews, and nieces. There were pictures of Wyatt Earp and his brothers, plus Bat Masterson and Doc Holliday. These were actual pictures the family purchased at the time, not reproductions. Bill's grandfather was in several of these pictures as a bystander. He had a receipt signed by Wyatt Earp for a gun that he bought from Earp after the marshal made sure a bad guy never needed it again. What interested me the most was the collection of 1873 Winchester rifles in a gun case on the wall. This was the rifle that won the West. Their families had used these guns to shoot coyotes, rustlers, horse thieves, bandits, and Indian war parties. This was more fascinating than eating dinner, but Bill and I decided that we could continue our step back in history later, if we knew what was good for us. At dinner, I got to listen to Pat's Carter family history that paralleled Bill's family. It was very interesting to hear this information about Ann's genealogy. It was late when Bill said he needed to get to bed so he could get up early the next morning. This was the minefield I feared. Where do I sleep? Am I presumptuous to think I get to sleep with an unmarried Ann? Getting ahead of the conversations, I said, "I'll go out and get the bags. That way the Greens will decide where I am to sleep." The trouble was they had not decided my fate when I returned. They were ignoring the Bobby question, so I stepped forward and said, "Bill, isn't that a bunkhouse down next to the barn? When I was a kid, I wanted to be a cowboy and sleep in a bunkhouse. Would you let me fulfill a childhood fantasy but letting me sleep there?" Pat objected. "Oh, you can't sleep in the old place. The bed has noisy old iron bed springs and you would not get a good night's sleep." "Maybe not, but I don't get old fantasies completed very often. What time do you want me back in the house?" Shaking her head, she said, "Breakfast starts at 8 a.m. I replied, "See you then," then grabbed my bag and went toward the bunkhouse. Bill said, "Let me show you the way." Bill and I commented on the beautiful sky full of stars. Not much light pollution out here. After we got into the bunkhouse and he showed me the bathroom quirks and said, "Bobby, you don't have to stay here. You can stay with Ann if you like." "Sir, I have not earned the right to sleep with your daughter under your nose in your house. This room is fine with me. I've stayed in much worse places while in the Army. This will work for me." Bill smiled, shook my hand, and walked back to the house. Pat was right. The bed was awful, but I was tired and I was happy with my life. This room did not have an air conditioner because here on the high plains, the summer nights get into the 60s, even though it is almost 100 degrees during the day. I had the windows open and a screen door to let the fresh, cool breeze in. I fell fast asleep but woke up as I heard a funny noise. I heard the spring on the screen door groan as it was opened, then soft footsteps coming toward the bed. Clothes were dropping to the floor. I recognized the shape of the body coming toward me. I held the sheet open for a nude Ann to join me. "Damn, I was going to surprise you." "You did surprise me. Surprised you waited so long to get out here." She laughed and created the sound that made my heart happy. "Bobby, you really impressed my mother and father tonight. They really like you. Dad, especially with you volunteering sleeping out here. If you would have demanded to sleep with me, he would have sent you out here. Since you volunteered to sleep here, he is fine with you sleeping with me in the house. Since this is my first meeting with your parents, I'll stay in the bunkhouse. I wasn't just telling a story about my childhood dream of sleeping in a bunkhouse. As a young boy, I wanted to be a cowboy. It was an escape for me to imagine myself being in the Old West instead of being with my horrible parents. The pictures of your family in Dodge City with Wyatt Earp and the others were fascinating to me. When I saw the bunkhouse, I knew I had to spend some time with the happy part of my childhood. I could not see her in the dark, but I heard, "Now let me provide some more happy times of your life." A feminine hand grasped my cock and tugged it to get the blood flowing. Bed springs creaked as she changed positions, allowing me to see the silhouette of her thighs. A heart-shaped ass was between me and the light. In the darkness, my cock was engulfed by a set of tender lips, lips that tightened to allow her to start vacuuming my dick into her throat. Her tongue rolled and twisted around my appendage, creating a wonderful feeling of euphoria. Her ass wiggled as if asking for some attention. I reached out and felt the velvet, soft, and tender ass that I adored. I raised both hands to caress both cheeks. I separated the cheeks, and in the dim, soft light, I could see the moisture starting to glisten in the gap between her lips. A swipe of my thumb confirmed the natural lubrication being generated by this nude woman. Another swipe brought out a moan that vibrated and thrilled my cock that was lodged in her throat. The iron bed springs creaked again as her ass settled above my face, and what remained of any light I had disappeared. That glorious pussy slowly lowered until my breath created a cool chill on her hot flesh. Tentatively, my tongue reached out and started to gather the moisture that was seeping out of her pussy. Using my tongue like butterfly wings, I tried to match the pleasure my lover was providing my dick and balls. The times of her body shuddering matched the stretching of my pelvis, me pushing higher into the air. Finally, both of us had reached the pinnacle of desire, with me shoving my pelvis up and blasting all my semen rapidly down her throat. Even though I shot everything I had out the end of my dick, she kept sucking and loving it. As she did that, she pushed her pussy into my face as if to demand equal satisfaction. Satisfaction I willingly provided that created a muffled scream and heavy breathing. Gradually, light returned as she moved off me and put her head on my shoulder. "I love you so much, Anne. This is amazing." "And I love you too, Bobby, more than I thought possible." She laughed to herself and said, "Thinking about possible, I never thought it possible that I would sneak over to the bunkhouse and suck off one of our hired men." "There is always a first time, Anne. Are you staying with me the rest of the night or going back in the house?" "I'd better go back inside. I just had to come out here and confirm to you how much I love you. I was always a good girl and made my parents proud, so I'll try to let them think I am still a good girl." "Oh, you're a good girl, very good." "Good night, lover. See you at breakfast." What a wonderful sleep aid that was for me. My eyes stayed open until I saw her leave through the screen door. After the first blink of my eyes, I was asleep. That was until the sun startled me awake as it jumped up from behind the barn and into my open window. The bunkhouse hot water heater had not been turned on, so I started the morning with a brisk cold shower. After I dressed in jeans and t-shirt, I walked outside and heard some noise coming from what I presumed was the metal machine shed. I saw a young man struggling to replace a large inside dually tire of a large truck. Rather than surprise him, I said, "Good morning, that's a hard job to start the day with." "Morning, this bastard is giving me the shits. Can I give you a hand with that? I've done that kind of work before." He replied quickly, "Sure, you get on the other side and we'll lift it up. Then I'll put on the lug nuts." Working together made this a short job and we were done quickly. As we crawled out from under the truck, the other guy said, "Thanks, I could have done it myself, but worn myself out for the rest of the day. I'm Gary." "Glad I could help. I'm Bobby." "Bobby? I thought your name was Mr. Wonderful for all the comments I have heard from Anne." Gary was smiling when he said this. I laughed at Gary's comments. Then I said, "I don't know why she is saying this because she's so much smarter than me. If you don't believe me, just ask her." Gary had a hearty laugh over that one. He asked, "If you don't mind, could I ask you for another favor? I need to get this LN 8000 into the shop to repair the hydraulic lift before harvest." just so long as I get my ass back here for the 8:00 breakfast. Gary replied, great. Do you want to drive my pickup or yours into Dodge? Why don't I drive this big rig? Give me the address and I'll start off to town. I'm sure you have some other things you'd rather do than take a slow trip to the shop first thing in the morning. I jumped up into the cab, started the 300 GP diesel engine, backed out of the machine shed, and headed to Dodge City. I watched Gary during this process because he was no doubt unsure of my abilities to drive this beast. The radio was all ready to set to the local Western music station, so I got to absorb some local flavor on my trip. Gary left the farm later than I did, but we arrived at the repair shop close to the same time. On the way home, he said, thanks for helping me out this morning. Otherwise, I would have to call one of the hired men come get me. You really know how to drive a rig like our Big Red. Where did you learn that? I spent 2 years in the Army as a wheeled vehicle mechanic. We had to have licenses to drive all the vehicles we repaired. How do you use that truck? The last week of June to the first full week of July, we used that truck to haul wheat to those huge white concrete grain elevators you saw coming into town. We have to hire local people to drive grain trucks so Dad and I can keep the combines running. Ann takes that time off so she can help Mom prepare food and get the meals to all the workers scattered over 10 miles. He continued, since Ann is going to be here working anyway, do you want a job driving wheat truck for us? The pay is lousy, the cab is not air-conditioned, temperature is near 100 degrees. We work 16-hour days, but the food and sense of accomplishment are great. You make it sound like a great job. How can I resist? Then we both laughed. Gary wanted to know how airplanes were made, and I asked how to grow wheat. We returned to Clear Creek Ranch at 7:30 a.m., so I washed up in the bunkhouse and went into the main house. They all seemed to know that Gary and I went out for a little ride. Bill asked, I see you met Gary this morning. I'm surprised he let you drive Big Red into town. He's pretty protective of that truck. Only the most experienced driver gets to drive it at harvest. Yeah, he told me how it was used during wheat harvest. Hey, Ann, I was offered a new job this morning. She looked at me saying, and? Yeah, I'm going to drive Big Red during harvest. Should be a hoot. What do you think? Does this fit into your plans? She laughed and said, so my brother told you I would be here cooking and delivering meals to harvest hands, and you think you are so smart. After a short prayer, our breakfast was worthy of the amount of physical work that these farmers put in every day. Mid-meal, I noticed some funny looks going on between Pat and Bill. Bill cleared his throat and asked Ann, are you having trouble sleeping these days? I thought I saw you sleepwalking last night. I saw Pat start to snicker as Ann turned beet red. She kept shoveling scrambled eggs into her mouth to keep from saying anything. She looked at me for a smart comment, but I just shrugged my shoulders and grinned. Ann put her fork down and said, I was concerned about Bobby being relegated to the hired man's quarters. There might be spiders in there since no one goes in there anymore. Besides, Bobby forgot to kiss me goodnight. When she finished talking, everyone, including me, laughed. So did Ann. Ann and I went separate ways the rest of the day. She went with Pat and I left with Bill. Since I indicated a desire to be a cowboy when I was young, Bill drove me around Clear Creek Ranch. Clear Creek came from Pat's Carter side of the family. Bill and Pat then acquired parts of other ranches as they became available. There were 3,000 acres of native grass that was original to the Indians and the buffaloes that dominated the area. They had 250 black cows that were on the grassland all year round. Each fall, they bought another 1,000 head of steers to feed over winter and early spring, then shipped them to the commercial feedlots. We rarely drove on paved roads going between ranches. If we did see another pickup, we had to stop and discuss the weather and the cattle markets. It was obvious that Bill loved this life and was very successful with his operation. When we got back to the ranch, we saw Gary in the machine shed. I lit up a cigarette and went in to talk to him. He looked at my cigarette and said, you know she's going to make you quit, don't you? Yep, we've had discussions about that. We're into negotiation stages now. He asked, how's that supposed to work? My grandfather was in France during WW2, and he traded cigarettes for sex with the French women. I'm using that as a guide. Do you think it will work? He smiled and said, you have no chance, pal. You're doomed. Since you have a full pack and I'm banned for life for purchasing any tobacco products, I need to bum a smoke from you. I was really beginning to enjoy my time with Gary. A BBQ at a neighbor's ranch was on the schedule for the evening. A huge grill was set up in the backyard, and as we drove up, it looked like an Indian camp for the people milling about in the campfire smoke. The delicious steaks were provided by the rancher, and all the women brought their best side dish that included Anne. There were games for the young kids, and a concrete slab, remains of an old building taken by a tornado, became a dance floor. There would be 3 generations of the same family on the dance floor at any one time. I danced with Anne on the slow numbers, but headed for the water tank full of beer for the fast dances. Several young men kept her active on the fast songs, swinging her around like the doll she was. As the songs changed from fast to slow, those rustlers grabbed her and wanted to dance close and slow. Every time that happened, she would push them away and wave her index finger for me to come and dance with her. It was a wonderful evening. We were all tired as we returned to Clear Creek Ranch. I kissed Ann goodnight and headed for the bunkhouse. I could hear the giggles as Pat and Bill teased Ann about sleepwalking again. An hour later, I woke up as my screen door slammed shut. This time, Ann did not bother wearing any clothes on the path from her bed to the bunkhouse. Without a word, she tore the sheet off my nude body, bent down and started to suck my cock. She swung her ass closer to my arms, demanding my hands to perform a magic task on her clitoris, a task I immediately took to. It was not hard work, as she had already worked herself into a frenzy before coming to the bunkhouse. She lifted her head from my cock and said, "Get up." That brought a quick response on my part. She pushed past me and flung herself spread eagle onto the single bed. The iron bed springs made a sound like 1,000 squeaking doggy toys. Again, one word was spoken: now. I was lubricating my dick on the generous amount of moisture of her labia when she said, "If Mom and Dad are going to tease me about having sex with you in the bunkhouse, I'm going to make sure they hear it as well. I want you to give it to me as physical and as long-lasting as you can." Given my directions, I started by listening to what move of mine would make the most noise. A giant slam did not make any more bed noise than an average stroke into her slick pussy. I set the rhythm, and the iron bed springs created a 2-phase sound of creaker, 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 a repetitious industrial rhythm. Eventually, she wanted a fitting ending, so with verbal encouragement from her, I increased the RPMs to bring orgasms to both of us. It did not take long, as we were both super excited and ready to explode. The quiet silence after we climaxed seemed deafening. I asked her, "Can you walk back to your room, or are you going to stay here with me?" "I'm staying with my man as long as I can." Then she drifted to sleep in my arms. Early in the morning, Anne made it back into the house prior to anyone seeing her. Breakfast was again at 8 a.m. with smug looks all around. No comments were made about how anybody slept, or if they even slept at all. The menu was bacon and pancakes for breakfast. I was the last one to be served, and everyone watched as a plate of pancakes was set in front of me, and also a thick steak. Bill grinned and said, "I think you need this, son." Everyone but Gary laughed, but I'm sure he will hear the story later in the day. We attended Mass as a family. I was accepted as a family member. Judging from how I was treated, I felt like was the family I had always wanted to be a part of. An orphan that had found a family to love and accept him. Anne and I headed back to Wichita late in the afternoon with packages of food and wonderful thoughts about our weekend. There was no sex, as we had overexerted ourselves. The only thing that we changed was that I moved into her apartment, one more step into becoming a permanent family. 3 weeks later, we went back to Clear Creek Ranch. Again, we were welcomed with open arms and welcoming smiles. As I brought my travel bag to the bunkhouse, I had a great laugh. The old iron bed had been replaced with a new twin-size bed frame and mattress. Pretty curtains covered the windows and the hot water heater was connected. On a small table was a vase with some sunflowers and a note, "Welcome home, son." The main purpose of this trip was for the chaos that is wheat harvest. This is the farmers' 2 weeks' time to gather a crop they had planted last fall. It was imperative they get the grain harvested before a thunderstorm destroys the crop with hail and wind. Gary and I spent time on logistics of moving Big Red to the right fields at the right time. We were prepared for harvest, and through everyone's efforts, there were no major mechanical breakdowns. It was successful as all the workers were safe, but exhausted at the end. It was late July when we were able to go back to Clear Creek. Friday night we spent with the family. Saturday, I helped Bill and Gary clean and repair equipment and vehicles used in the wheat harvest. After dinner, Ann told everyone we were going for a night ride to see the Perseid meteor shower. Of course, I had no idea what we were going to be doing, but whatever it was, we were doing it on a horse. Ann bridled her buckskin mare and I was to ride Bill's roan gelding. Ann saddled both horses, we mounted and started walking down the driveway. A mile later, Ann stopped at a gate, got off her horse, opened the gate and motioned me to take both horses through. She tied both of the horses to the metal gate and said, "Please take off all your clothes, put them in the saddlebag, but put your boots back on." Who am I to resist such a request? The sight of a beautiful naked woman swinging her booted right leg over a saddle is a very erotic sight. I was a lucky man. Then I saw Ann reach behind her, pull out a towel and put it underneath her ass. "What's with the towel?" Then I saw that smile I adored, and she said, "I am so wet right now I hate to have my saddle smell like pussy. Plus, you may enjoy a pussy that doesn't smell like a horse saddle." With that thought in mind, we rode on a vehicle trail through the native grass. I kept moving my horse from behind to in front to beside Ann. Each view had its distinctive benefits, her ass moving up and down with the movement of the horse. From the side view, her breasts flopped up, then down with each step. The front view was dominated by the smile on her face as I twisted to watch her. We stopped on a hillside facing north, looking down on a pastoral view in the moonlight. No one was around for miles. She opened the bedroll from behind her saddle, took out a fresh blanket, and laid it out for us to lay on. She turned to me and said, "This is a very special place on our ranch. This was where great-grandfather found the springs to water his cattle, making it possible for the family to survive. Water bubbled up from the springs in the rocks. Dad drilled a pipe down and the water flowed into that water tank over there. Indians also considered this a special place. Even though great-grandfather had the deed to this ground, he never denied local Indians from coming here. 12 area cattlemen once a year, each took a fat steer over to the small Indian camp. They also would employ some of the Indians to help gather cattle in the fall to move them to winter pastures." She continued, "Tonight we are going to watch the Perseid meteor shower that happens each July and August. We may see between 30 and 90 falling stars while we lay here. This is the perfect spot because there is no light pollution here. I've come here for this show at least once every year since I was born. Mom and Dad also will come up here on horseback and talk about all the family members who have been here in the past 130 years. She said, "I told the family we were coming here so we could have this to ourselves. You're the first man I have ever taken here. Thank you for the honor. This truly is a special place. I had not planned on this, but this is far better than I had imagined." We turned to face each other, sitting crossed legs, and as I held her hands, I said, "Ann Green, would you make me the luckiest man in the world by marrying me?" She sprang at me like a rattlesnake striking at a prairie dog, fast and deadly. "I will marry you, Bobby Smith. Whenever, however, but definitely forever, I will be your wife." Since we were already naked, it didn't take long to start fucking. We took turns being on the bottom to watch the shooting stars. The view of her beautiful face, glowing smile with breasts wobbling as she rode my dick with shooting stars going by, was totally magical. We really enjoyed doggy style as we saw the same meteors at the same time, adding to the stars in our eyes from making love. As we laid arm in arm watching the sky, contemplating what our life would be like, she jumped up and screamed, "Look!" I saw 1,000 stars, but not what she wanted me to see, so I stood behind her as she pointed to 2 unusually bright stars side by side. Underneath those stars was a U-shaped cloud. It was a smiley face emoji of giant proportion. Ann took it as approval by the universe of our engagement. In a few minutes, the clouds moved on, but we were there to experience a beautiful thing. "Ann, would you excuse me for a minute, please?" She gave me a curious look. I got up and went to my horse, opened the saddlebag, and took out a small box. It is very difficult to hide a velvet box from a woman while both of you are naked laying on the prairie. She had it identified before I got back to the blanket. I opened the box for her, and the diamond caught the sparkle of every shooting star. Needless to say, she was delighted with the ring. Smiling, she said, "You will have to ask my father if you could marry me." "I did that earlier today. Didn't you see the beaming in his face at dinner?" Laughing, she exclaimed, "I thought it was because Mom had her hand on his leg." We laid back on the blanket to enjoy our experience and the view. After a while, she got up and said, "Shall we go freshen up?" She started walking away, so I followed. It makes me happy to follow that ass. A water tank with cool, clear water was sitting in the middle of the pasture. She swung her leg over and said, "Come on in, the water's fine." The water was clear and the fresh water bubbling up from the ground was cold. The splashing water by my fiancé was exhilarating and refreshing. It didn't take a long time to determine we were clean enough to put on our clothes. We held hands while we rode back to the barns. After the tack and horses were put away, she decided to spend the night with me in the bunkhouse. Before breakfast, her ring finger was extended to anyone who looked in that direction. Mother shed tears of joy and her dad had his chest pumped out. Gary was happy for both of us. The engagement started months-long process of planning and considering the tiniest detail for a successful wedding. I felt sorry for Pat, as my mother was not present to help with the planning and execution. The wedding was held at the Greens neighborhood church. It was not a large building, but there were many friends, neighbors, and relatives that expected to be invited. I didn't ask Bill how many steers he had to slaughter for the wedding dinner. Gary was my best man, and 3 buddies from work were my groomsmen. Anne had 4 of her cousins to stand with her at the altar. Bill had the ushers seat the guests on both sides of the aisle so as to not call attention to my lack of relatives. The wedding went off without a hitch, and everyone had a great time. My work buddies enjoyed dancing with the attractive cousins of Anne and Gary. 2 days later, we boarded Amtrak's Southwest Chief in Dodge City to Santa Fe, New Mexico at 5:55 a.m. The week there was wonderful, both inside the hotel room and out. From there, we started our lives like any young married couple. That was until that fateful Saturday afternoon several years later when I received a phone call from the city police. Anne had been in a serious car crash and was in ICU at the hospital. I called Bill as I drove like a madman to the hospital. It was unfair of me to do, but I had no one else to talk to about it. The doctor told me she was in critical condition with major damage to her heart and major organs. There was no brain damage they could tell as of yet. He told me I could visit with her for a short period, just enough so she knew I was there and wanted her to live. She opened her eyes when I called her name. I told her I was there for her and that her parents were on the way to see her. She grabbed my hand and would not let go until the nurse made me leave. Pat and Bill made record time to arrive 2 hours later. Immediately, I got them into the room, even though it meant I had to step out. There was not much we could do but wait and pray. The 3 of us kept trading off all night, so someone was with her all the time. The next morning, we met with the doctor, and he gave us the bad news. Her kidneys were shutting down and was causing most of the other organs to call it quits also. He apologized that there was nothing they could do but keep her comfortable. I asked, "Does she know about this?" The doctor sighed and said, "She is a very fine nurse. She had kept me on my toes this whole time. She knew what the result of her injuries would eventually do to her." Pat gasped. Bill turned his face away and tears were soaking my shirt. The doctor said, "She will probably pass today, so I've given approval for all 3 of you to visit at the same time." Bill went outside to call Gary to come right away. Pat and I hugged until it was time to dry the tears and go into her room. I led the way into her room and was greeted by a weak voice. "Hi there, cowboy. I'm glad you're here. There's no place I'd rather be than beside you." Just then, Bill came into the room and said, "Hello, princess," and kissed her forehead. Anne said, "I'm glad you're all here as I only have strength to say this once. I am so glad to have had this life with the 3 of you. You are all so special to me, and I love you all. Listen to me. This is important. I do not want any despair and depression on my leaving you. Please only think of me in the times we were having fun, not that you miss me. I know you will keep me in your hearts, but do not ruin the future by weeping over the past. Bobby, you are my one true love. I want you to love again, get married, and have the babies you said you wanted. Please do that for me. Remember, I will always be a part of you. I will always be there for you. I will become your guardian angel until you join me." Mom, Dad, thank you for all you have done for me. I love and cherish you. Please do me one last favor. Please take care of Bobby. You are the only family he has now, and I don't know how my guy will get along without me there. I'm real tired, so let me nap for a few minutes, then we can talk again. She squeezed my hand to let me know she was still with us. Her sleep was not peaceful as she moaned and mumbled every so often. About mid-morning, she squeezed my hand real hard, then let go. Her face muscles started to sag and her arm had no life. She was gone. We had asked the doctor earlier to unhook her from her monitors so we were not jarred by her passing, and he agreed. The three of us stood and hugged, saying nothing. I left her to inform the nurse that it was over. We divided her ashes into 3 parts, one for burial at their church, one for scattering around the Clear Creek Ranch headquarters, and one jar to be combined with mine and scattered on her special place on the hillside. It was a solemn event, and there was a full church. I was still staying in the bunkhouse as we wrapped the details up. I took an extra 2 weeks bereavement leave from Cessna and spent it at the ranch. I went back to work just to rearrange my mind and focus. Every weekend I drove to Clear Creek to help Gary work on whatever projects needed extra labor. It was very good for my mood as I could almost feel that she was on the front porch watching us. Most evening I rode to the special place to sit and communicate with whatever spirits were listening. I was more and more of a part of the Green family's social events. Easter Sunday was celebrated on the special place as that was the ideal place to watch the sun come up. I attended Mother's Day and Father's Day with Pat, Bill, and Gary. There were several neighborhood BBQs that were pleasant memories. Gary asked me to join him and his friends for the first day of pheasant hunting in November. Gradually, I was moving on, not that I wanted to, but because I needed to. Anne wanted me to move on. Christmas and Thanksgiving were hard on all of us, but by the end of the holidays, we were getting life back to normal. Gary would come to Wichita every few months and we would go out partying. A year and a half after we said goodbye to Anne, Gary and I were in a Western bar and dance in Wichita. 2 young ladies stylishly dressed in Western short skirts and cowboy boots walked by us and smiled. We left our glasses of stale beer and asked them to dance. With Anne's prior prodding and training, I was now able to not embarrass myself on the dance floor. Gary and I spent the next hour with Shelley and Kathy. Me with Kathy and Gary with Shelley. Kathy excused herself to go to the bathroom and Gary went for more drinks. Shelley put her arm around me and said, "Would you please dance with me?" Of course. So we took the floor to a slow song. Shelley said, "I'm really not into Gary and Kathy says she does not mind being with him. I know we just met, but can I spend more time with you?" How could I say no thank you to a good-looking blonde like you? Don't tell Kathy, but I preferred you anyway. It was Gary's turn to have first shot at the good-looking girl in a twosome, so that's how that happened. Kathy laughed. "I traded up to the guy with the biggest line of bullshit, didn't I?" "Yep, but I am better looking and a better dancer too." We spend the next several hours talking, drinking, and dancing. I got her phone number and asked if we could go to dinner Sunday night, and she agreed. Gary had a good time with Kathy, and they may get together the next time he is in Wichita. It was obvious Kathy was not going to Dodge City to see him. Shelley and I had a lot of fun that Sunday. It was a little touchy when she asked how I knew Gary. I told her he was my brother-in-law until my wife was killed in an auto crash. He's a good buddy, and I go pheasant hunting with him each fall. She was sympathetic to my situation, and we did not talk about it again. We strolled down the normal relationship pathway. We had a date in the middle of the week, just to do something together. We had a standing date on Saturday night for dinner, movie, and some dancing. Then we added Sunday afternoons to drive around, talk, get an ice cream cone or something so simple but yet rewarding. She has had sex with 3 guys, so neither one of us was a virgin. We moved gradually from kissing to groping to fondling and then full-fledged fucking at the end of 2 months. She was a wildcat in bed, loving everything I did to her and giving me everything I asked for, and then some. While the sex was great, it was the intimacy of being with her that moved her into my heart. We enjoyed every second we were with each other. It did not take long for her to move in with me. She was now my love and my world. She did not mind my week-long trips to Clear Creek to help wheat harvest and go pheasant hunting. It actually helped our relationship as both of us recognized how much we missed each other. We had so many similarities that we quickly melded into a couple. She wanted at least 2 kids, so did I. She wanted to have a nice house after marriage, so did I. Shelley had a job in the accounting departments of one of the hospitals. She had some education beyond high school, but not a lot. Everything was wonderful in our world until I came home from work one day and she was sitting on the couch and crying. Please forgive me, Bobby. It was a mistake and I can't take it back. I am so sorry. Please forgive me. I did not like the words she was saying. What did they mean? I was afraid I would lose another lover. I said, I will forgive you. Now tell me what horrible thing you did so I can kiss you and tell you it's all okay. No, you'll throw me out of the house. Please, I love you. Please stay with me. It was about 10 more minutes of crying about this unmentionable event before I just said, stop, tell me now or I'm leaving to go to the bar. Drunks make more sense of what they are talking about than you. So talk now. I'm pregnant, Bobby. I'm sorry we talked about waiting until we were married, had a house and were settled. I've messed it all up. Please forgive me. I was surprised because she was on the pill. Oh, well, I guess that didn't work out. My hands cupped her face and I drew her to me and said, I have 2 questions for you. Think before answer me. I will not allow you to come back later and change your story. Are you ready? Yes, she sobbed. Okay, pay attention. Shelley, I love you so much. Will you marry me? It took her a moment to comprehend what I had asked. Then you're not mad at me for getting pregnant? You want to marry me? Oh, Bobby, I'd love to marry you. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much for not being mad at me for getting pregnant. I'm very happy to ask you to marry me. I want to live with and love you forever. Now then, for my next question. She had stopped sobbing but was continuing to make funny sniffling noises. Can we name our baby Carter? I just love that name, boy or girl? She flung her arms over my neck and said, I love that name too. We are going to have such a wonderful life with our new baby. The next 2 months were a whirlwind of activity with wedding and baby plans. Everything that she had planned for both events were appropriate and within reason for cost. There were no prima donna outbreaks in our apartment. The only problem we had was her asshole sister, always pushing to have things done the way she wanted if she were in the same spot. She told Shelley I should spend 3 times my gross monthly salary for her ring. I told Shelley that was fine if we could move into her sister's house for 3 months and not pay rent, food, or car payments. Her sister Beth, the bitch, did not see that as a viable solution. Her husband Hal was not much help as he continued to harass me about how cheap I was and how great he was by paying 4 months' salary for Beth's ring. I know how he paid for the ring. He rang up a bunch of credit card purchases, including the ring, then filed bankruptcy and walked away laughing at how smart he was. The only disappointment in the wedding was from her parents. They wanted a big, lavish affair to try to impress their friends, but were very vocal about them not paying a dime toward the event. So Shelley and I had the wedding we wanted for us, not for anybody else. Gary Green was my best man again. Pat and Bill were invited and gladly attended the event. I was very happy to see them. Our Carter was born March 3rd and was a healthy, happy boy. Shelley was the perfect mother, knowing exactly what to do and when. I just did what I was told, except I did not need to be told to hold, love, and care for him. In June, we brought Carter to Clear Creek Ranch for the start of wheat harvest. I had cleared this with Bill and Pat before we arrived. During that phone call, Pat had an emotional moment when I proudly told them our son was named Carter. Shelley had only met Bill and Pat for a moment at our wedding, so this was her first real time to visit with them in the ranch. The plan was for Shelley to go back to Wichita the next day, while I stayed to help with harvest. Pat almost ran over Bill and Sir Henry, their dog, to get to Carter as we drove up to the ranch. She started by hugging Shelley and then carried Carter into the house. While Shelley was a great mother, she was ready for another woman to help with her son. Neither her sister or mother wanted to do more than coo at the baby and then ask Shelley, "Do you have anything for us to eat or drink?" Pat did a good job of making sure she did not overstep the motherly boundaries that women assign with the care of their children. Pat fed Carter and was rocking him, waiting for him to go to sleep. Shelley took the opportunity to ask me, "Can we go for a walk?" "Sure," was my answer as I wondered if something was wrong. Shelley grabbed my hand and said, "I just want to walk with you, you and me, just ourselves. I love my son, but I do like time being with his daddy." She continued, "Pat is just fascinated by Carter. You would think it was her own grandchild." In essence, it is her only grandchild, if you consider me still being her son-in-law. I do consider her as close to a mother as I have ever had. She and Bill treat me like a son, and I love them as parents. Their daughter is no longer in my life, but I am in their life and they in mine. Of course, I consider our relationship my first consideration. I hope you are not bothered by my relationship with them. A couple of steps later, she said, "I think you are keeping things in balance." We walked around for about an hour, and then the mommy alarm went off, and we went back to the house. Everything was quiet as Carter was asleep and Pat was working in the kitchen. Bill and I went to meet Gary and discuss which fields we were going to start combining the next morning. Bill and Pat took turns holding and feeding Carter until he went to sleep for the night. Shelley could not believe how dark the night was until she looked up and saw 1,000 stars as we carried Carter to the bunkhouse. We were surprised to see a brand new baby bed in the room. It had a blue blanket with boots, saddles, and horses for our little cowboy. It was a message that Carter was welcome to visit them any time. Shelley returned to our home after lunch. She had planned on leaving after breakfast, but she and Pat started talking and time flew by. I stayed at the ranch for a week, and then Gary took me back to Wichita while on a parts run to the John Deere dealer. 2 years went by, and Shelley gave birth to our second son, Tyler. Pat came and stayed with us for a few days as she happily took care of Carter while Shelley was with Tyler. When the boys got bigger, we started spending more time at the ranch. They were now big enough to start riding horses and understand old-time cowboy stories told by Grandpa Bill. The 6 of us went to Boot Hill, where they rode in a horse-drawn stagecoach, watched a gunfight on Front Street, and drank sarsaparillas at the Long Branch Saloon. We took the boys to a pasture west of Dodge City to see the wagon ruts on the Santa Fe Trail still scaring the land. They loved being able to live around cowboy history. We let the boys stay a week or two each summer. They became friends with some of the neighbor kids and would ride their horses over to each other's homes to hang out. Pat and Bill took them to Sunday school, and that increased their group of friends. The more they stayed at the ranch, the more they wanted to come back to the ranch. When they were 10 and 12 years old, they wanted to spend the entire summer at the ranch. We compromised and did allow them to spend the month of July after harvest. By this time, Shelley had grown weary of ranch life. It was fun at first, but it was also hard work and not as much fun time. The month the boys were at the ranch, she wanted to go out dancing and partying every night. She was getting closer to that magic big 40 and wanted to pretend she was turning the clock back. She was back to work and had a group of younger women that she hung around with. That fall, I took Carter with me for the first time to the annual pheasant hunt. He had never seen a ringneck pheasant and was anxious to join his friends. We had 10 men in our hunting party. 8 would walk a field to get the birds up, and the 2 at the far end would block so birds would fly up in front of the shooters. The boys would walk beside and behind their dads. That afternoon, the boys were taught how to clean and dress the birds. Each boy created a headdress of long, colorful tail feathers to wear that evening. We would eat about a third of the birds that night, freeze, and take the rest home. Carter brought home a number of beautiful feathers for his mother to put in arrangements. Shelley was not impressed, and the feathers disappeared, much to Carter's disappointment. The next summer, the boys made a big pitch to spend the whole summer at the ranch. They told Shelley and I that we could visit any time we wanted. Shelley was not pleased by the plan. She wanted the boys to stay in Wichita, but did not feel the need to spend much time with them. She worked during the day and was out with her friends several nights a week. She would walk out the door at 7:30 a.m. and may not be home by the time they went to bed. So you can see their displeasure with the situation. Shelley and I had some disagreements with her time away from home. I had no reason not trust her being out with friends, but I did not think she should be spending all that time with those particular friends. Pat called me while Bill was driving her and Gary to Wichita. I could tell she was upset. Then she told me that Gary was very ill. His whole life he had been plagued with kidney stones. His continued cigarette smoking had made the problem worse. So much so that he had developed end-stage renal disease and needed a kidney transplant. I found out that he had been on the list for a new kidney for some time, but none were compatible. I knew he had this problem, but he did not seem to act like it was life-threatening. They wanted to meet me when they got to town. I went to their doctor's office and asked them to test me to be a donor to Gary Green. The next few days were very stressful for the family. The boys were very concerned about Uncle Gary. Finally, as Gary was deteriorating, they determined that I was a perfect match for him. The transplant was scheduled for the next morning. That night I went to see Gary, and he was overcome by the chance that he could get a transplant and continue his life. He thanked me profusely, and I told him that this proved we were blood brothers, even though we had different parents. We were wheeled into adjoining surgery suites early the next morning. I told him, "See you on the other side," as we were separated. Unknown to me, when Gary was wheeled into the operating room, his heart stopped, and the doctors could not restart it. My surgeon had already made the first cut to remove my kidney when he was told the surgery was canceled. When I woke, Pat and Bill were in my room, so I asked, "Is Gary's surgery complete?" Pat started to cry, and Bill got up and held my hand and said, "Gary died of a heart attack on the surgical table. The doctors said they could not do a thing as his kidney had quit functioning. The water on his lungs and heart were the final blows." We all cried until the nurse came in to give me a sleeping pill. Every rancher for miles was at Gary's funeral on a bright sunny day. Shelley, the boys, and I sat with the family in the front pews. Shelley took the boys home, but I stayed at the ranch recouping from my interrupted surgery. Gary was preparing to take over the ranch, so Bill was being forced to do more of the work. I was going to spend most weekends at the ranch to give him a hand. This decision did not sit well with Shelley, as she wanted to maintain her social life with her friends, not take care of two active boys. We differed, but did not get into any shouting arguments. She did come home from work one afternoon and was happy as a schoolgirl. She had been appointed her department's representative to the employees committee at work. No extra pay, but some prestige and the chance to do something different. The hospital had a connection to have a famous football player come to the hospital to headline a fund drive for a new children's wing. Since Lance Belton came to Wichita with some regularity to have his Cessna citation serviced, his agent had agreed to have Lance speak and encourage donors to give to the hospital. Belton was a wide receiver for the Oakland Raiders and had a reputation for being a dirty player. Of course, that was also the opinion of all Kansas City Chiefs fans in town. Shelley got to sit at the head table with Belton at the luncheon. She was also in the group that led him from ward to ward in the hospital to see the kids. Since his citation was at the Cessna runway, I went over to where his jet would be leaving for Los Angeles. I saw Shelley and her friends fawning over Lance, and he was enjoying it by kissing and hugging all her friends. I tried to get closer, but was not allowed as the jet engines were ready to start and people were being moved back. Lance put his arm around Shelley and gave her a kiss that was not a "thanks for showing me around" kiss. He took her hand and started to pull her to the plane. She resisted, but her girlfriends pushed her forward, all the way to the stairway to the jet. Lance lifted her and put her on the first step and started pushing her into the jet. As she got to the top step, he flipped up the back of her skirt to display her thong-covered ass to her friends. Those bitches laughed and clapped as she was pushed into the cockpit. The door was closed and the engines revved up. There was no way I could get close to the plane, so I used my cell phone to call her. She answered and said, "Hello, dear. Guess who is going to Los Angeles tonight for dinner? The jet has to be in St. Louis tomorrow, so they will drop me off on the way back to the next stop. See you tomorrow." And then she hung up. I ran over to where her friends were and asked what was going on. They laughed at me and said, "Shelley is going to have the night of her life, flying in a private jet and joining the Mile High Club." Working in the aircraft business, I knew what that was. It was fucking above 1 mile elevation. This was a shocker to me. Why would she do this? The girls saw my despair and teased me about being cuckolded by an NFL all-star on his private jet. One girl said, "She'll be back to you and your dull farm life tomorrow, but it will be a night she will never forget." That's right, she'll never forget the divorce that will ruin her life. That got their attention, and one said, "It's a big deal to her. Don't spoil this treat. Very few women get the chance to have a night of sex with a pro football player in his private jet. She deserves some fun. Just get over it." I hope she has fun because it's going to be hell for her when she gets back to my house. Then I stomped off, as I did not need to hear anything more from those sluts about what my now slut wife was doing. I stopped at Home Depot and bought a dozen different size boxes to load her shit into. I got an Uber to take me to the airport, and I took her car back home so I could load boxes into it. She will have to find her own ride home. Later on, I got a text from Shelley. It was a picture of a naked Shelley on her knees in the aisle of the plane sucking a large cock. The caption was, "Hi, Bobby, having a great time. Too bad you're not here." When the second text arrived, she was on her back, legs splayed out wide, with Lance's cock stretching her pussy. A big dollop of cum was oozing out of her cunt onto her asshole. Considering the positioning of the two of them, someone else had taken the picture. The text was, "I am now an official member of the Mile High Club. Take me out to dinner tomorrow night to celebrate, okay? Someplace real nice, as this is a special treat. The third and final text showed Shelley on her knees in the aisle again. She was sucking Lance's cock again, but this time there was cum on her cheeks and face. An overweight, swarthy man with lots of dark, greasy chest hair was fucking her doggy style. All he was wearing was his captain's hat. The caption read, "The menu for tonight's flight included a great sandwich with a special sauce." The next morning, I called my supervisor and asked if I could have a few hours off to take care of important development. He approved, and I called the guy that had the most divorce attorney ads on television for an appointment. The guy I met with was not the big boss, but it was a young man that seemed bright and well-versed in what happens when a wife cheats and the husband wants a divorce. He said, "It's a simple mathematical equation. She gets 90% of the assets, and you get 10% of what the two of you had. Also, since you have two sons, you will be paying 35% of your salary to her for child support. I've looked at your tax returns and schedule of payments, and you two are just getting by now. If divorced, you will have the same bills for her to live in your house, and you get what's left over. And that's not much." He continued, "Bobby, you will need a second job just to pay your rent and have some cheap food. Since she will only get part of your paycheck, extra items for your boys will be hard to come by. Things like sports uniforms, camps, bikes will be extras that you two may not be able to buy. She can live in the house with your boys and fuck every guy that comes by. You get to pay the mortgage payments, and she can continue to fuck who she wants." I lamented, "So I am screwed. Is there anything I can do?" He said, "Put your ego on a shelf and wait until the boys are at least 14 years old. Then they can choose who they live with. From what you have told me, they would prefer to live with you. Then divorce her. It will still be costly, but you will not have to pay child support. Your salaries are not that far apart, so the alimony will not be crippling. Here is a battle plan for you. Do not yell, scream, or threaten her. It only emboldens her position in court. Get a small recorder and capture as much of each significant conversation you can. You can throw her out of the house for a few days now, but she has rights to that house. She can get back into it by court order, so not block her. Do not have sex with her until she has had a complete and humiliating battery of STD tests." Continuing, he said, "Using history as an example, if she cheated now, she will definitely cheat again. We will use that to our advantage. You cannot use adultery as a reason for divorce. However, if she wants to get back with you, require a post-nuptial agreement that says whoever, including you, cheats get nothing in the divorce and will have custody of the boys." Now you have two ways to get out of this mess. Neither one is quick or easy. I will work with you on any specific items you want to have in the agreement, if that's the way you go. There's a fine line to walk to make it sound like you won't take her back, but yet will let her come back with the post-nuptial. So be careful. If she gets a good attorney because you piss her off, you could be in a tough spot for a few years, so be careful. If she decides she does not want to get back with you, then you'll be giving me and her most of your wages for years. My first thought was, thanks for nothing. My main goal in life now was to protect my boys from being victims of a divorce war. I had to do what it took to get custody of them. Their mother was a slut, and I had to get them away from that selfish bitch. If I had to play the role of a complacent cuckold husband, I would do it for a short period. Not what I wanted to do, but it was the only thing I could do to remove them from her. Once I cooled off, I realized that I will follow his advice, but not until I get to tell her just how much she has hurt me. I loved her, and she did this to me. Last night, I was tempted to destroy everything of value that was hers. It's a good thing I didn't. I vowed she was going to be destroyed, but I had to hold my horses. In Army basic training, we learned the biggest test of patience is to wait until the enemy is unknowingly fully in your ambush kill zone before opening fire. I need to make 2 ambush plans, as Lance the wife fucker will also be ambushed. I got home from work just slightly before she arrived. As soon as she walked in the door, she was pissed and asked, "Why did you move my car home but not come to meet me? Didn't you get my texts? It was a hassle for me to get home, and I don't appreciate it." I turned my phone off to stop the disgusting texts I was receiving. "Come sit with me and tell me about your trip." I moved to the easy chair so she could not sit next to me. Happily, she said, "It was a great trip. The takeoff was fast and hot. We gained altitude very quickly. The pilot flew us south of Denver so I could see both sunset over the Rockies and the lights of Denver. It was fascinating to watch the land move by. I had a wonderful time. You would like Lance. He is a great guy. I talked to you club girlfriends, and they told me you were going to be a member of the Mile High Club on this flight. Did you become a member? Her face froze for a second as she composed something to say. She inquired, what is the Mile High Club? You know, it's a club you get to join after you have sex in a plane above 1 mile elevation. So, are you a member of that now? Stammering, she spoke, oh my gosh, no. Lance was a real gentleman. He knew I was married to a wonderful man, and I would not cheat on him. Why were your friends telling me you were going to join the Mile High Club, and you tell me you don't know what that was? Gathering her thoughts, she said, I don't know why they said that. Nothing like that happened. So, you did not have sex with Lance? Sternly, she said, no, I did not, and I resent this questioning. Do you think I am lying to you? Did you kiss him? Quickly, she said, yes, just a peek on the cheek. Let me get this straight then. The only time you kissed him was a peck on the cheek. You did not know about the Mile High Club. You did not plan on fucking an NFL all-star in his private jet as you went to Los Angeles. You did not have any form of sex with him or anybody else on either of the plane trips. Is this correct? She sat straight up and said, that is the truth. I do not lie to you. I love you, and I resent you doubting me. Sorry, dear. Instead of questioning your honesty, let's look at some pictures sent to me from your cell phone. She got a worried look on her face and tried to get up to leave and run for cover when I said, here, dear, is a picture of you and Gentleman Lance as you are sucking his cock. Or is this not you in the picture? With all the blood draining out of her face, she said, on my God, where did you get this? Oh, Bobby, I am so sorry. This is just horrible. No, babe, this is the start of the horrible things that happened. This is what is horrible. A picture of his cum squishing out of your cunt and another picture of some hairy jerk fucking you while you are sucking cock. That is what is horrible. She fell to the floor into a puddle, sobbing and weeping. I sat still as a stone, letting the consequences sink in for her. Between sobs, she said, you weren't to get those pictures. They're for only me as a reminder of a memorable evening. He must have used my phone to send them to you. I did not write those horrible things to you. This is even worse then, isn't it, Shell? You cuckold me and keep the mementos for yourself. For the rest of your life, you can relive the best sex of your life by staring at those pictures, all the while lying to me about your fucking him. You treat me as just another dumb shit husband who adores his wife even though she is out fucking some guy she just met. What a sad situation for both of us. Don't you love me anymore? Am I that bad a lover that you do this to our marriage? Now, uncontrollably sobbing, she sputters, no, it wasn't like that at all. It was me having an exciting adventure. It was not about cuckolding or humiliating you. It was me doing something exciting, and it had no connection to our marriage. Well, it will be your marriage being disconnected as a result of your great adventure. When that plane door slammed shut, it closed out our marriage and our family. She cried, our marriage does not need to suffer. I know I made a mistake and will never do that again. We can get through this. We just have to love each other enough to save it. Standing up, I said, I don't know how we're going to do that. Your clothes are already in your car. You and I can't be together right now. You need to go somewhere else for a few days until we can get an idea of what will happen next. Frankly, right now I cannot stand the sight of you. All I see is your mouth full of his cock and cum on your face. How can I unsee this with you around? Please leave. But this is my house too, she sobbed. Yes, it is your house also, but if you want to save your marriage, you better leave for a few days. If you don't, with the mood I'm in, I will go right to the attorney to get a divorce. I'm giving myself a chance to cool off. If you want a divorce, then let's get the dueling attorneys to line up against each other for the bloodbath. Bobby, I have nowhere to go. I don't want a divorce. I want to stay with you. I'll never do anything like that again. You have your slut friends that encourage you to get on the plane. You can tell them about the one night of heavenly fucking you had, only to face a lifetime of hell when you returned. Should be fun for them to hear the story. She shook her head and said, okay, I'll do that. But please remember, I love you, Bobby. Funny way to display your love for someone. I see his cock and cum go into your mouth, and all that comes out of your mouth is your lies. She blew her nose, wiped her eyes, and asked, can I call you tomorrow? Sure, I said. But I did not agree to answer that phone number if I didn't want to. The next week was a repeat of that afternoon discussion. She said she loves me and wants to get back together. I say I am having a hard time just welcoming her slimy cunt back in my house. That evening, I started off with my plan to balance the scales. It took 3 evenings to get the project complete. I texted Shelley and asked to go to dinner and talk about everything except our marital troubles. She gladly accepted my invitation. Every word we spoke was reviewed by the other as if to ascertain if it was a veiled threat or put down. She wanted to go back to our house, but that wasn't going to happen. We parked near her friend's apartment, and I said there are some things we need to talk about. She searched my face to see if this was good news or bad news. Shelley, no matter what happens to our marriage, you need to get tested for STDs, for your own health and concern for the boys. She said that won't be necessary as both the guys were nice, clean men. I'm not going to trust our son's health to your opinion of nice, clean guys. If you don't get a test, then I will get a restraining order to keep you away from them. She saw this as concern for our boys and not as humiliation of her, although it was my plan to do just that. Since you told me nothing but lies about your plane trip, I want to see the results of these tests. You'll have to work hard to get me to trust you again. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. If the circumstances were reversed, I would do the same. 2 days later, she called and wanted to stop by the house for a few minutes. I relented and opened the door when she knocked. With all the shame in the world heaped on her head, she handed me the tests that displayed positive for both syphilis and chlamydia. I was delighted but could not show it. This really improved my bargaining position for a postnuptial. All I could say was, "Oh, Shelley," but I said it very sadly. She went to hold me, and I pushed her back and said, "Not until you are clean." Bloodshot eyes looked to my face, nodded, and went crying out the front door. The next time I saw her, she stopped by the house to show me her clean checkup for STDs. It was really hard on her to have this happen, and she was not as aggressive to me about getting back together. She did ask me to go to the lake with some friends just to change the scenery and topics we discuss. I agreed, as I was ready to lay out some nasty shit on her. That brings us to where this story started. Ooh, zero, ooh, zero, ooh, zero, ooh. I turned to Shelley's nasty sister and said, "Shut up. The more you open that foul mouth of yours, the less I want to be related to anyone in your family." "Shelley, tell her to shut up or you and I won't speak until Christmas." At that, Shelley walked over to her sister, put her finger on her saggy fat chest and said, "Shut up about this. You're just making it worse." As the noise died down on the boat, I stood up and said, "I'm going for a swim to cool off." With that, I pulled off my t-shirt and heard Shelley gasp. "Oh my God," she exclaimed. There, on the left side of my chest, was a large tattoo of a bright red heart. Around the top of the heart was my one true love. Shelley thought I had done that to prove my love for her. Instead, inside the heart were 3 letters, Anne. I stood and watched as she turned to vomit overboard. She stood up, walked up to me, and touched the heart. "How could you do this to me?" "I could ask the same of you, Shelley. How could you do this to me?" She stammered, "How could I look at this as you make love to me?" "The same as I could look at you with a tattoo in my mind of his dick in your mouth and cum on your face. Which one of these is worse? Do you feel my pain now? Now I can be the one who says, just get over it." That pretty well ended what was supposed to be the neutral get-together. Shelley and I started marriage counseling, and it was more of the same talks we have been having for weeks. No resolution of the main issue between us. She now has a clean bill of health and wants to move back into the house. I told her I was agreeable, but we need to have a post-nuptial agreement to be clear about the expectation of each other. I met with my lawyer and gave him my specifications. My wording to him was, in consideration of Bobby not filing for divorce based on the infidelity of Shelley with Lance Belton and others, Shelley agrees to the following. 1. Never speak of Lance Belton or any of the sexual activities she had with him and others in his plane. That includes attempting to humiliate Bobby with unfavorable comparisons to Belton. 2. Shelley will not have any written, verbal, or electronic correspondence with Belton. 3. Bobby agrees never to refer to Shelley as a slut, cunt, whore, cum dumpster, or any other derogatory comments pertaining to her sexual activity with Belton. 4. Both parties will make honest attempts to reconcile their relationship after Shelley's infidelity. 5. Shelley will be tested for HIV/AIDS in 3-month intervals for 9 months. 6. Both parties agree that if one party comments adultery, then that party gives up all rights to ownership of their house, joint accounts, custody of their children, and forego any receipt of alimony. 7. Shelley agrees to always tell the truth and never lie to Bobby. My attorney told me this was a very humiliating post-nuptial agreement, and if Shelley had adequate legal representation, it would be rejected. I told him I thought she was ready to agree to everything I listed. He polished the agreement so he could get an extra $1,000. I presented it to Shelley and she readily signed it. I could have had a clause about her not hanging around her slutty friends. I did not because I wanted to give her a chance to cheat on me again, and then I would wipe her out of my life. She would not have the chance to poison my sons against me. She was delighted I helped move her clothes back into the house. We only have 3 bedrooms in our house with the boys each having a bedroom. It was a dilemma as to our sleeping arrangement. We wanted to put on a good front for the boys, but I was not looking forward to sleeping next to her. Once again, I looked at the end game of getting her out of my life instead of the short-run pain of sleeping next to her. I was hoping my tattoo of Anne on my chest would discourage any sex with me. I left on Friday nights to go to Clear Creek and came home on Monday mornings, eliminating 3 of 7 nights with her. I had to suck it up the remaining 4 nights. She tried everything to have me fuck her. I turned her down by saying, "Not yet, let's take it one step at a time. Let time help us heal this." I lied. One morning I had to deliver a part to a plane under maintenance at the airfield and I saw it being asshole Lance's plane. I strolled over and talked to some of the guys I knew in that hangar. They confirmed that it was his plane and he was in it. I decided to make a late-night call on the plane to see what I could do to make his life or what's left of it miserable. I knew I could not take him man to man or even man with heavy wrench to man. He was a large, strong man. Shooting him or sabotaging his plane came to mind, but I would miss my boys while in prison. Still unable to make a plan, I came back to the hangar at 9 p.m. to see if there were any weaknesses I could exploit. I was surprised when I saw lights in the cabin, but the door was pulled up. I found a rolling ladder and pushed in close enough to see what was going on in the cabin. There he was, sitting in front of his computer. From what I saw, it was a pedophile's paradise with multiple videos available. Now I had the plan. I took a short video of what I saw and went straight to the police station. They were all over this and called a judge to get a search warrant for him that night. I went with them on the raid to show where his plane was and how to get close to him without him seeing them. Once the police were in place, I backed away as I did not want him to know I had been in on this. The police came at him from all angles. 2 policemen on the rolling ladder videoed his computer prior to ripping the cockpit door open. He struggled, but a couple of taser jolts and he was quiet. They confiscated the computer and ran him to jail. It was all over the news, and I know Shelley saw it but never commented about it. Neither did I. She did question me about being near his plane the night I worked late. I shrugged and she said, "I hope Lance rots in hell." So did I. Since he had his own plane and lots of money to flee the country, he could not bond out. Perverts like him do not make friends very easy in prison. Under the influence of Shelley's slut friends, plus my rejection of her sexually, it did not take long before she was caught cheating again. No football hero, no TV star, just a horny bartender who got her liquored up and fucked her in the storage room. A couple of guys joined him and somehow the video got out. She had to go back to the clinic to clean up the STDs again. My lawyer was correct in his assessment of her. She was going to cheat again, and now I had her over the barrel. After I showed Shelley the video of her fucking in a storage room, she hyperventilated and slumped into a chair. I did not need to say a thing. I told her, "Call your fellow sluts and have them come over to haul your shit out of my house." The next day, 3 nasty cunts showed up to help Shelley move her stuff out. I did not want to miss this exodus. Plus, I did not trust them to either take or destroy my stuff. I was the center of their self-righteous anger. The bleach blonde with DD plastic tits snarled, "You have got to be the biggest jerk in the world to shove a woman who loves you out into the street." After laughing, I said, "She got to fuck someone else like she wanted but promised not to. She knew the rules and pissed her marriage away. Now she'll have to deal with the consequences. At the airport, you told me to get over it. This is how I'm getting over it." by throwing her ass out of my life and my marriage. She had an exasperated look on her face because she knew I was right. We had to meet in my attorney's office to sign the divorce, deed, and custody documents. Shelley had brought an attorney along to contest everything we had already signed. He pontificated, huffed and puffed, and exclaimed, "This post-nuptial agreement is an outrage. It's just a humiliating rant by a bitter, vengeful man. It is worthless." My attorney glanced at me, then said, "You are correct. This agreement is humiliating to both parties. It is disgusting and offensive. However distasteful it is still legal. This is what you and I do every day. Take something disgraceful and repugnant and make it legal. So let's just get this over with." I left the meeting with Shelley sobbing and wailing in the conference room. "My home, my kids, my marriage, please don't take that all from me. I'll have nothing left. Please, I beg you. Please." It's probably the last thing I ever hear from her, I hope. Carter and Tyler started to talk to me about moving permanently to Clear Creek. I had no problem with that, but I had to talk to Pat and Bill first. Shelley was gone from my life, so I took the boys to Clear Creek Friday night. I told Pat and Bill the whole story and that we were now divorced. They were very disappointed in Shelley, but were glad their 3 boys did not suffer too bad. That's right, we were now their 3 boys. While driving through the pastures, Bill and I discussed us moving into the bunkhouse, and I would be an employee of Clear Creek. Bill smiled that wise smile he had and said, "Interesting, you should mention it. Pat and I were discussing that earlier, and we're going to talk to you about this. We would love to have you 3 boys permanently on the ranch." We shook hands on it and continued our discussions. I was particularly dirty from working in the shop the next afternoon, and Pat came out to check on me. I was holding my shirt under the water hydrant to both clean it and make it cooler to wear when she came into the shop. She stopped for a moment, stared, and started walking silently to me. As she stood a foot from me, she placed her hand on my tattoo. The only tattoo I had, the one that proclaimed that her daughter was my one and only love. She hugged the sweaty, foul-smelling me. Softly, she said, she was so lucky to have a man that loved her so much. Yeah, I really loved her and miss her a lot. She turned and walked back to the house, holding a tissue to her eyes. As school ended for the boys, we sold the house in Wichita and moved to the bunkhouse. Both boys had their own rooms, with a third room being converted into a TV family room. We did not need a kitchen as Pat did all the cooking. Shelley kept contact with the boys by email and phone calls. I had absolutely no contact with her. Carter was old enough to drive on a restricted farm errand license. Amazing how many places he could find to go on farm errands, both boys enjoying the social scene of the neighborhood kids. It seems the name Amber Reynolds came up in conversations as to where Carter went and who he was with. I asked him, "Have you met her parents?" He answered, "Yes, she is one of my teachers and her dad was a veterinarian, but he died 2 years ago. Her mother is kind of cool." That was an encyclopedia of information to have come from Carter. Toward the end of summer, the neighborhood ranchers had the annual BBQ. I now knew a majority of the ranchers, so I felt at home at the party. As I stood by the beer tank, I saw a woman looking the other way that I thought was Anne. It could not be, but it looked like her. I started to move toward her and she turned, saw me and smiled. I smiled back and realized she was of Hispanic descent and definitely not a clone of Anne. Someone touched her arm and she turned to talk to them. I ambled off, glad I did not embarrass myself. A little while later, Carter and Amber asked me to come over and meet her mother, Emily. I readily agreed. It turned out the part Hispanic woman was Amber's mother. Close up, she was a very pretty woman, with some features that were similar to Anne's. We hit it off and continued talking after the kids had left us. We even had several dances together. As we were walking off the concrete dance floor, I saw Pat walking toward us. She was arm in arm with another woman, and both had big grins on their faces. I said to Emily, "I wonder what Pat has on her mind for me now." Emily replied, "How do you know Pat?" "She's my mother-in-law and I live in their bunkhouse with my boys." "Then you must be him," she almost shouted. "What him?" I stammered. "The him that married Anne. I was Cousin Anne's maid of honor at your wedding. The woman with Aunt Pat is my mother, Mary Hernandez. Mary and Pat are sisters. Oh my God, that's why your son's name is Carter, isn't it?" She called to her mother, Mom, it's him, Mother, Anne's husband. I finally found him. Emily turned to me and said, let me see it. See what? I asked. The tattoo, the love tattoo for Anne. Please let me see it. I opened the buttons on my shirt. Then she placed her hand flat on the tattoo, and an electrical charge went through both of us. There was a connection that was very strong. Both of us stared into each other's eyes, and we knew we were connected. Pat said, I see you two have finally found each other. We had hoped you two would do this on your own, so you did not think we set this up. Out of nowhere, I realized we were holding hands. Pat grabbed my open shirt and turned to Emily and said, You and Anne were just alike. You can't help trying to undress this man. We all howled with laughter at her comment. I was not trying to create a new Anne, and she was not looking for a clone of her deceased husband. We really grew to care and love each other for what we were, not what we missed from a deceased spouse. The next July, Emily and I rode horses to the special place to watch the Perseid meteor shower, a place she was well acquainted with. As we sat on a blanket holding each other, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small box. Emily, my love for you is so deep in my soul that I must be with you every day. Will you please marry me? Oh, Bobby, I really want to marry you. You are the best man for me in this entire universe. We kissed and laid back to hold each other, knowing that where we go from here will be special for us. All at once she shouted, Look! There it was again. First time I'd seen it since I proposed to Anne. 2 stars with a cloud making a big smile. Asterisk, asterisk, underscore, 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 slash. Epilogue. Bobby and Emily were married that fall, and Bobby moved into Emily's house. For the first time in almost 20 years, there was no one staying in the bunkhouse. That was until Cater received his university degree in animal science production management and moved into the bunkhouse. He liked his privacy, especially when Amber came to visit. A year later, Carter and Amber again melded the Smith and Carter families. As they started having children, they moved into Pat and Bill's house when they moved into an assisted living community in town. Bill still drives out the Clear Creek every day to supervise and remember. Tyler comes to the ranch at wheat harvest, at pheasant hunt, and on holidays. He has a live-in girlfriend and resides in Kansas City, where they both have jobs. Bill and Pat provided the funds for their 2 grandsons to receive college degrees. Both the boys will go to visit their mother for holidays and her birthday. She married a man that retired from the U.S. Post Office. The boys think she is happy now. Lance Belton pleaded guilty in lieu of a trial as he did not want any more investigations into his reprehensible activities. He received a 12-year sentence in a place he did not enjoy. Pat and Bill transferred their shares of Clear Creek Ranch Inc. to Bobby, Carter, and Tyler, 33.3% to each. Clear Creek pays Bill a consultant's fee that meets all their needs at the assisted living center. Bobby and Emily are totally in love with each other and how their lives turned out. They both had pain and sorrow to endure, but they found a way to push it to the side. Bobby's tattoo did not deter Emily's desire to have sex with him, even though it was her cousin's name on his chest. She gladly tells her friends that over the years, she has tried over 1,000 times to let it bother her while having sex with Bobby, but it doesn't faze her at all.